Yes. So my name is Mikael Syväjärvi. So I'm also from the Linköping University, Sweden, and I have been some experiences in starting up companies and technology transfer and so on. So now I will a little bit introduce the purpose very briefly. So let's see if I can make, now it should be a larger picture. So today we will talk about nanocapacity, and capacity is basically how to make more usefulness in different ways. And we go from the innovation, and since we are in the nanotechnology, it will be long-term impact. And my background is that when I was a PhD student, I developed the method for silicon carbide for making growth of thick films for power devices. So that was quite successful. We had these thick films of silicon carbide with good quality and so on. But it was not pure enough. So it was not useful for the power devices. So it could not convert because there were impurities in that one. So that method was the highlight of my thesis, 1999. So it was a method which was totally useless for its purpose. And then a few years later came Satoshi Kamiyama from Mayo University, and he was interested in silicon carbide thick layers with certain impurities, because then you can get light out from the silicon carbide. So it was a new type of research. So that's how this research finding came into an avenue, and then it was technology transfer for our process to Japan, and now it's being developed further if there will be fundings. But that's how I first got into the interest in making usefulness from the research findings. It was thanks to this failed mistake of making a method, which then a few years later had its place in the world. And my second experience is related to silicon carbide. So when we grow silicon carbide, the silicon and carbon atoms go to the vapor, and sometimes there is more silicon to the vapor than carbon. So this is very bad for the growth, but that was actually how we came into graphene. So when we had one layer of carbon on silicon carbide, then we had the graphene on silicon carbide. So that's how we came into that avenue. And then there was a lot of interest in the material. So researchers were asking for samples, and we distributed samples faster and faster, and then we could not manage to keep projects. And then we were thinking, how can we get rid of these free samples and so on. Then we started a company 2011 in graphene on silicon carbide. So that's how we made an own startup. And I had my first experience in setting up such activity. But that's how I got into this field more and more. And I was involved in sales activities and part-time working for company and so on. And later, a few years, they came the graphene flagship and the Swedish graphene program, which means that there's a roadmap, a bigger thinking of how to position the research findings into a larger context. So that's what the graphene flagship is about, and other programs which are now running in the world. And also internationally, there's an interest in technology transfer from materials and so on. So I have some of those experiences also. So now I have been shifting, like Eric, I don't write papers any longer, so I'm shifting towards such things. So that's my experience. And in addition, for those who are from Europe, European Commission now has the smart specialization strategy, which means that regions should focus on some things where they are stronger, and then they should build collaboration and network. And basically what they are building is a value chain. And in technology, we're building value chain from material to application to system and so on. So these things are in parallel. So I think now if we position our research findings into larger contexts, not only value chains, but also these regional things, then we can have more opportunities, especially for the long-term implementation. And I know a little bit about these things because I was involved in a working group from 2013. And then what is actually happening is that regions should focus on the strengths. And now comes the second phase, where regions should collaborate to do these things in Europe. And also, of course, the next step after that will be collaboration internationally about these things. So these are some aspects of how to create more capacities, not only the technological or the business or the economy when you count how big is the market and how are the predicted sales and so on, because some of these things we don't know, especially like in graphene or the fuel cells, then no one has an idea about what is the market because it's so into the future and so many things still happen. But if we do these things together and combine in different ways, then it will be much bigger impact. And also, just a last example, what is happening is that most of you will know about the Nobel Prize for the blue LED 2014 in physics. So that they got, so Professor Amano was at the European MRS conference, and he was talking about that, yes, the blue LED, and it got commercialized, and then you got the white LED, and then you have a big business. But it took more than 30 years. And now the investors at the local governments, what they want is that they want this to happen in less than 10 years. And he said, oh, it's not possible, of course, but so on. But then they started to have actual programs for these things to encourage students to become entrepreneurs when they want it. And also how to develop production technologies. It's not only the research findings and so on. So they have programs for these things with mentors and internships. So I think this is a good example how something can be put into a bigger perspective. But at the end, all these things, they originate from our findings. So when you're a PhD student and you're doing the first findings, then maybe you will not succeed. But then it comes to another opportunity later on when things have matured or in different ways. So the science and technology is the core thing about these things. So that's my main background motivation about this, what capacity is about.